Every civilization leaves a door someone forgot to open. This is case file number 9. Deep within the quiet valleys of southern France stands a Neolithic megalithic tomb constructed roughly 5,000 years ago with immense labor and precision. Archaeologists initially classified the structure as a collective burial chamber designed for an extended lineage, assuming that each interment represented another generation of the same family group settling into their ancestral home. The sheer scale of the stone construction suggests a community effort, yet the design implies a continuity of use intended to span centuries under a single genealogical banner. Beneath tons of limestone and granite lies the silence that usually speaks in whispers of bone and soil. Excavation teams carefully cleared these chambers, expecting to find overlapping generations sharing DNA markers consistent with parent-child relationships stretching back through time. The initial findings seemed to confirm standard Neolithic practices, where kinship bonds were physically manifested through shared resting places. However, as scientists processed the ancient remains using modern genetic sequencing technology, a peculiar anomaly began to surface that defied established biological models for isolated prehistoric communities. The results did not align with the expected family tree. Instead of matching profiles indicative of direct descendants, the samples revealed distinct paternal lineages from different regions appearing within what was supposed to be a single domestic unit. Some researchers speculate that this tomb may have served as a communal repository rather than an exclusive family vault, perhaps welcoming outsiders or marking political alliances through burial rites despite genetic disconnects. The evidence suggests our understanding of prehistoric kinship structures might be too rigidly defined by modern assumptions about isolation and heredity, leaving the true social contract of these ancient builders still obscured behind layers of stone and time. Across Western Europe during the late Neolithic and into the Bronze Age, a distinct tradition emerged of constructing massive stone monuments to serve as family resting places. These megalithic tombs were rarely intended for single interments. Rather, they function as communal spaces designed to accommodate burials over several centuries. Archaeologists frequently uncover skeletal remains within these structures that represent multiple individuals deposited at different times, creating a layered history of death and memory preserved beneath tons of stone and earth. The prevailing interpretation among the archaeological community is straightforward yet profound. These chambers were hereditary monuments belonging to specific kin groups who sought immortality through their ancestors' final resting places. Successive generations would return to the same location over hundreds of years, adding new burials while leaving previous remains undisturbed until they naturally decomposed or were consolidated into soil. This practice suggests a deep cultural belief in lineage and continuity, where the physical structure served as an enduring anchor for a family's identity long after individual members had passed from sight. However, beneath this accepted narrative of generational succession lies a growing complexity that challenges traditional assumptions about human history in these regions. While many tombs have yielded evidence supporting the biological kinship model, recent analyses indicate instances where the genetic connections between those interred do not align with simple familial relationships. Some researchers speculate that social bonds or alliances may have occasionally superseded strict blood ties within these sacred spaces, blurring the lines between a purely hereditary tomb and one serving as a broader communal necropolis for allied clans. In these quiet French megalithic tombs, archaeologists originally expected to find a unified family unit resting together in peace. The prevailing assumption was that individuals interred within a single chamber shared direct biological ties, perhaps brothers and sisters or parents with their children, bonded by bloodlines preserved through centuries of silence. When geneticists fatally extracted ancient DNA from multiple skeletons found inside these stone structures, they anticipated confirming close kinship patterns typical of communal burial practices seen elsewhere in Europe during the Neolithic period. The laboratories were set up to map mitochondrial haplogroups and Y chromosome lineages under bright lights, seeking a clear narrative of descent that would explain why strangers seemed so intimately connected by death. However, the sequencing results delivered a startling contradiction that defied every initial hypothesis. Instead of revealing a cohesive clan linked by shared ancestry, the data showed individuals buried side by side who displayed no direct genetic relationship whatsoever to one another across generations tested. The profiles belonged to people with distinct maternal and paternal origins, suggesting that those interred together were not necessarily biological relatives but rather members of the same broader community or extended social network. This discovery shattered the simple notion that every tomb contained a single nuclear family, forcing experts to reconsider how kinship was defined and celebrated in these ancient societies without relying solely on genetic proximity. Some researchers speculate that this deliberate mixing of unrelated lineages served as a powerful ritual mechanism for integrating new members into an established group or solidifying alliances between different families over time. By placing individuals from diverse backgrounds together within the same sacred space, the living may have been performing a complex social act rather than merely preparing bodies for individual rest. The absence of direct genetic links points to a community identity that transcended bloodlines, prioritizing shared culture and collective memory above biological kinship in matters of mortality. As we look closer at these stone monuments, it becomes clear that the families buried here were constructed through choice and ceremony, weaving unrelated threads into a single tapestry before they ever crossed the threshold of death. For centuries, archaeologists have stared into these vast stone chambers and assumed that every skeleton buried within belonged to a single biological lineage, yet modern DNA analysis has shattered this comforting narrative with startling precision. The genetic profiles recovered from sites across France reveal individuals who are not closely related by blood but were nonetheless interred side by side in deliberate groups. This discrepancy forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. The tombs we have long celebrated as ancestral homes for specific clans may actually be memorials to social contracts rather than genealogical trees, challenging our fundamental definitions of kinship in the Neolithic world. Rather than viewing these groupings as errors in identification or evidence of chaotic burial practices, leading researchers now propose that co-burial served a profound symbolic function, marking deep communal bonds that superseded biological descent. Some specialists argue that being buried together signified a marriage alliance between two distinct communities or represented the adoption of a new member into an existing social structure through ritual integration. In this context, shared lineage becomes less important than shared identity. The tomb acts as a physical monument to political unity and collective memory, where the status granted by association with respected elders outweighs the absence of genetic connection in defining one's place within the group. The implications of this interpretation ripple far beyond these specific French sites, potentially altering how we understand family tombs at Neolithic locations worldwide that were previously assumed to be exclusive ancestral repositories. If biological relatedness was not the primary criterion for burial placement, then our entire reconstruction of prehistoric social networks may rest on a flawed assumption about what held ancient communities together. The silence inside these stones no longer speaks only of bloodlines but whispers of complex negotiations and strategic partnerships that allowed disparate groups to coexist peacefully under a single roof, suggesting that family was never just a matter of DNA but a carefully constructed narrative woven from threads of loyalty, exchange, and mutual survival. The initial assumption that every stone burial represents an isolated family unit shatters when we look closer at the genetic evidence from sites like Le Keramiste in Brittany. While many tombs do contain clusters of individuals sharing clear maternal lineages, suggesting a nuclear family laid to rest together, this pattern is far from universal across all Neolithic megaliths. A significant minority of interments within these same structures reveal no biological connection whatsoever to their neighbors, challenging the notion that every chamber was exclusively reserved for kin. Instead, we are confronted with a complex mosaic where unrelated strangers and close relatives share the sacred space side by side, defying simple categorization into standard social models. This inconsistency forces us to reconsider our understanding of Neolithic society in France not as a rigid hierarchy or purely communal egalitarianism, but perhaps something more fluid and ambiguous. Some researchers speculate that these tombs function less like domestic hearths for single families and more as vast ancestral repositories where the boundaries between bloodline and social alliance became porous over generations. The presence of unrelated individuals suggests that political alliances, marriage pacts, or spiritual obligations could outweigh strict genetic ties in determining who received an honorable final rest among the ancestors. It implies a community identity so strong it absorbed outsiders into its collective memory long before they were biologically related to anyone living there. The data presents us with an honest complication that current theories struggle to fully resolve without forcing contradictory facts into uncomfortable corners. We cannot yet explain why some families insisted on exclusive burial burial rites, while others integrated seamlessly, or if the mixing of unrelated DNA represented a deliberate act of social cohesion rather than mere neglect of tradition. Until we can reconstruct the nuanced rules governing these prehistoric communities, the tombs remain enigmatic archives where biology and sociology dance in an intricate, poorly understood waltz. The silence beneath the stones masks a history far stranger than our modern sense of family allows us to imagine, leaving archaeologists with more questions about ancient social contracts than definitive answers regarding who truly belonged there. The anomaly we have uncovered in France is far from unique to a single site or region. Recent genetic analyses of other megalithic tombs scattered across Europe reveal a disturbingly consistent pattern that challenges our understanding of Neolithic kinship and identity. In chambers located from the Iberian Peninsula to the Atlantic coast of Britain, scientists are finding similar discrepancies between the skeletal remains interred within these monumental structures and the biological profiles expected for such family burial grounds. These findings suggest that what we initially perceived as an isolated error or a local custom was actually part of a much broader, continent-wide phenomenon occurring during this specific era. Some researchers speculate that these tombs may have served purposes beyond the simple containment of ancestors' remains within a single lineage. The evidence points toward a social practice where individuals were deposited in collective monuments, perhaps to honor their status rather than solely their biological relationship to those already sleeping below. In several instances, DNA data indicates that the deceased entered these structures without direct genetic ties to previous occupants, implying that entry into this afterlife space was granted based on community standing or marital alliances instead of strict bloodline purity. This approach would have fundamentally altered how social cohesion and memory were constructed in small farming communities where everyone knew each other's names and histories. Yet the reasons behind such widespread behavior remain obscured by the passage of time, leaving us to navigate a landscape of silence and stone that speaks volumes through contradiction. If these mismatches represent a deliberate choice rather than an accidental mix-up or later intrusion, we must confront the possibility that our modern concepts of family inheritance did not exist in their current form nearly 8,000 years ago. The sheer number of tombs displaying this genetic disconnect suggests a cultural logic so distinct from today's standards that it feels almost alien to contemporary sensibilities, inviting us to reconsider whether these ancient monuments were indeed final resting places or something more complex, perhaps serving as gateways for those who claim membership in the living world through deeds rather than DNA alone. Now, the part historians won't confirm. Here's what if beneath the cold stone floors of these ancient communes lies a reality that defies our modern obsession with bloodlines. Standard archaeological methodology has long prioritized genetic sequencing to reconstruct family trees, assuming that those buried together must have been related by birth or direct marriage. Yet when we look closely at tombs where DNA profiles clash yet burial customs remain unified, some researchers speculate that this discrepancy points not to error, but to a sophisticated social architecture we are only just beginning to understand. The evidence suggests these spaces were never merely repositories for the dead of a single clan, but rather deliberate institutions for binding unrelated individuals into an artificial kinship through shared ritual and mutual obligation. This hypothesis challenges the prevailing narrative that Neolithic society was strictly hierarchical or determined solely by ancestry. Instead, imagine a culture where belonging was earned through participation in communal rites rather than inherited at birth. In this speculative framework, the tomb itself acts as a physical manifestation of chosen family, a place where strangers become brothers and sisters not because they share genes, but because they chose to stand together against time. The act of placing unrelated individuals side by side would have been a profound social contract, signaling that community's continuity relied more on shared ideology than biological lineage, creating a bond stronger than any genetic marker could ever measure. Such a structure remains invisible in our current records precisely because we are hunting for what is not there. Clear lines of descent rather than complex networks of alliance. If these tombs represent early experiments in egalitarian social organization based on consent and shared purpose, then the silence of the archaeological record speaks volumes about how poorly adapted our analytical tools have been to this specific kind of history. We may be looking at a society that understood long ago that human connection transcends biology, prioritizing the chosen over the born in ways that modern science struggles to quantify or verify without altering its fundamental assumptions about what constitutes a family unit in prehistory. While our investigation into the Neolithic tombs of France has uncovered startling anomalies in genetic lineages and burial practices, it is crucial to acknowledge that ancient DNA analysis remains an exceptionally young discipline within archaeology. For centuries, these megalithic chambers were studied solely through their stone structures and pottery shards, leaving vast swaths of human history silent until recent technological leaps allowed us to peer directly into the biological past. Currently, only a fraction of known European sites have been successfully genetically sampled due to the fragility of ancient remains in acidic soils or damp climates. Many potential subjects simply cannot be tested without destroying them entirely. This limitation means that our current understanding is incomplete by design, and numerous questions regarding lineage breaks, population movements, and social structures remain stubbornly unanswered across the continent's most famous burial grounds. The silence left behind by these untested sites often speaks louder than any data we possess, suggesting that some communities maintain distinct cultural identities or biological histories that modern science has yet to decode fully. We must proceed with caution when interpreting our findings from France and similar regions like Britain or Ireland, as the absence of genetic evidence for a specific tomb does not confirm uniformity but rather highlights significant gaps in our dataset. Some researchers speculate that localized practices might have diverged so sharply from regional norms that standard sampling protocols failed to capture them at all, potentially masking unique family dynamics or ritualistic exclusions within these stone monuments until better preservation techniques emerge decades from now. But case file number 9 wasn't the strangest door we found. Case file number 10 brings us back to where this archive began, a round platform in Peru that may have been built to watch the sky itself. Some say it shouldn't be opened at all.